ready to go. I would like to introduce first and ask to stage Oliver Birk, Director Platform Business in BASF Coating. Welcome, Oliver. Oliver will be moderating our next session, Successful Ecosystem Strategies, where we will learn about strategic decisions to make and traps to watch out for when building ecosystems. And we also have one online participant, Ron Adner, so if you can please get Ron also on the screen, that would be wonderful. Off you go, Oliver.
Hi, Ron, can you hear us?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, very well. Okay, good. Welcome. And I'd like to ask to come on stage Miriam von Straelen and Julian Kawohl. So many thanks for joining our session on successful ecosystem strategies. And yeah, please have a seat. Let's get together here. If you don't mind, I rearrange a bit so that I can see Ron a bit as well.
Hello, Ron.
So, first of all, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists here. Oh, sorry, I'm messing up the panelists here. And I would like to start with Miriam von Straelen, your partner at Roland Berger, very much involved in digital transformation and in ecosystems and platform businesses. Happy to have you here. We have here with us Julian Kawohl. He is Professor for Strategic Management at the HTW, the Hochschule für Technik and Wirtschaft, exactly. In Berlin, in Germany, and also the author of the Ecosystemize Your Business, a book. We will talk about that as well. And many thanks, Ron. You're joining from the US. Great to have you with us. It's not too early, I hope, for you. Ron is professor at the Tuck School of Business. It's at the Dartmouth College in the US. And you're located in Nashville, right?
In New Hampshire.
Wonderful. So we are going to talk about successful ecosystem strategies. My name is Oliver Birk, as Emilia introduced me. So I'm the one who's in the business and the practitioner who's dealing with the challenge of how should a successful business strategy look like. And Miriam is supporting, consulting companies in doing so. Ron and Julian, as academics, have the theory background, but also do consultancy and have their concepts. Ron also wrote books. One is Through the Wide Lens, and the other is Winning the Right Games. I guess we are going to tap into that as well. But from my side, so much enough. Maybe short introduction round from yourself, what you want to share from your side. Personally, how are you interested in platforms and in particular ecosystems? Miriam, do you want to start,
yes,
please?
Sure, absolutely. It's wonderful to be here. A great pleasure. Thank you, everyone. So my name's Miriam von Straelen, based in Berlin as well, actually. So this is quite a German panel here today. Good that you're here, Ron, to spice it up a little bit. I'm partner at Roland Berger in the digital business unit, and I focus on digital transformation, digital innovation, digital solutions to grow your business, but of course also to potentially cut your costs. And focusing on digital ecosystem marketplaces platforms, so I'm feeling very much at home here at this event. And I have another angle where I focus on customer experience excellence, so very much to what Claire spoke to earlier. I think it's the future. I mean, we've heard today several people talking about the importance of ecosystems, how this is the next evolution stage. So I think next to AI, ecosystems are the second most used buzzword lately.
Very good. Thank you, Miriam. Julian, do you want to continue?
Absolutely. First of all, good afternoon all together. I'm also really happy to be here. I have kind of this double role. on the one hand, as you mentioned, I'm teaching, doing research in the field of business ecosystems, especially developing management concepts. And you mentioned the book, of course, I have it here, Ecosystemize Your Business. And as it said, it's about how to approach the complex topic of business ecosystems intuitively with management tools, frameworks, and processes, and to get started with a strategic perspective, with a portfolio perspective, and ending up with a business model perspective. And so that's also my second hat I have, which is doing advisory also for companies. And I live the ecosystem by myself because I'm collaborating together with the colleagues of PwC, which are also here downstairs with a booth, to drink their own champagne and bring this topic also to the companies and to the markets. And ultimate remark, so my passion is about, and we discussed a lot about sustainability, purpose, and I developed the concept of ecosystem to human, which is an add-on to the B2B and B2C thinking, to think more holistically in ecosystems and with a human-centric perspective, and that is actually the notion and the key of my research, to drill that perspective down into concrete actions within the companies.
Great, many thanks, Julian. And Ron, from your side, a short introduction. What is your specific interest?
Yeah, well, hi, everybody. I'm sorry I can't be there in person with you, but I'm glad to join virtually. And I didn't realize how wide lens the Zoom camera would be, so I apologize for the mess of my office behind me. So my name is Ron Adner. I'm a professor at the Tuck School, as Oliver said. I was a professor at INSEAD for 10 years before that, so I spent 10 years in France. And I've been working in the area of ecosystems and interdependent value creation really since the first time I wrote something on it was in 1999, so quite a long time. My academic research is all primarily focused on this question of how strategy changes when pieces on the board start moving around. And I've written 2 books on this, one called The Wide Lens, one that just came out called Winning the Right Game. It's been a really, it's been interesting to see how this set of concepts has really exploded in terms of interest and activity over particularly the last 10 years. So I'm really excited for the panel. Can't wait for the conversation.
Very good. Thanks, Ron, for your introduction.
And Ron, for professoral office, it's very tied up, so respect. So don't worry.
Very good. So let's start with the first question, Ron. And I would like to start with you, as we're talking about your books and in particular also winning the right game. So which game to choose as a company or as a startup in which you want to deal. First of all, the question, why should a business start engaging in an ecosystem? What would you consider should be the reason to think about it?
I think it's a good question, right? And one could come at it from 2 different angles, right? One is the choice of engaging in an ecosystem, which would be the perspective of, as I'm thinking about growth opportunities, how do I think about new value creation, right? And I think kind of the real difference between the industry mindset and the ecosystem mindset is that when we use the word ecosystems, which often is kind of a synonym for mishmash, for me, when it becomes material is when we're able to speak in a clear way about the boundaries that we're trying to cross. And it turns out that when you're trying to drive growth across boundaries, you need a different strategic toolkit. The other side of it is whether you have a choice or not, as actors around you are impinging on you and competing with you from new directions that are different from your old rivalries. And so in that regard, we don't really have a choice about engaging in ecosystems. It's just how much are you going to blind yourself to it? How much are you going to think about it from a defensive perspective? Right? How do I respond to an ecosystem attack? And how much are you thinking about it from an offensive growth perspective? And I think every company today basically needs to be thinking about this defense and offense simultaneously, which is another way of saying you don't really have a choice. The ecosystem is already engaging you.
Mm-hmm. Thanks for the insight, Ron. And then thinking it further, whether it is offense or defense, I would come to the second point and turn to you, Julian, talking about the value of an ecosystem. So, and you're addressing that in ecosystemize your business and in the ecosystemizer concept as well. So how can one identify the value potential that can be tapped by engaging in an ecosystem?
Very good question, and I would add on Ron's answers. I share totally what you said, Ron, because the one thing is the market perspective and the competitor's perspective, but the other perspective, or the other perspective is the client perspective, and I think that's the most important thing. Ecosystems are just a mean to fulfill customers' needs, to do that better than with singular products or services. And I think that is also part of the answer, meaning from single or standalone offerings, whether it is products and services, to integrated experiences or integrated and seamless experiences. That is actually the shift we see in many, many industries. And Ron, as you said, that is the blurring of industry thing from the market perspective, but the customer likes it. It's there, it can be digitally enabled, and the markets are growing together, and the customer gets better solutions. And so this is the main part of the answers why you can create value better with others or superior with others than alone. And then, of course, you have to leverage this value with your assets. So the question is, what do you bring to the party? What does others can bring to the party that 1 + 1 is more than 3? And that is, of course, a case-by-case decision. You have to find the right scope, identify the right topics where you actually can find the sweet spot where ecosystem can help, whereas they cannot help. So once again, ecosystems is not the solution for everything. There will be still traditional business models, product-driven, service-driven, single offering-driven, which will be very successful today and also in the future. But I think, or I'm sure, in the future we will see more and more integrated business models. And you have to take exactly this decision to use ecosystems as a mean to go for these more integrated experiences when it's suitable and necessary.
Yeah, many thanks. So that leads directly to the question that needs to go to Miriam then, because you have the experience in customer experience building throughout your career, and now you're consulting at Roland Berger companies with this focus and on ecosystem. So my question would be, if then one wants to start in engaging in ecosystems, what are the first steps one should take? In particular, also, how would you challenge then companies to come to the decisions which role they should take in an ecosystem? Can you explore that a little bit?
Absolutely. I'm so delighted that you actually gave me a really good segue into this question, as if it were planned. It wasn't actually. But having the customer in the middle, of course, right? I mean, this morning I was listening, I forgot his name, talking about outcome centricity. I really loved that as well. I need to remember this. But it's about customer centricity and making sure that the customer experience is the best it can be. It's all about convenience. It's all about having a one-stop shop. And I love the idea of ecosystems. It's a humble concept, right? Because no one player thinks they have the answer, because they have to do it together, and then 1 + 1 becomes 3. And before I joined Roland Berger, I was working for companies like eBay, PayPal, and eBay, of course, primarily. I think I actually have not done the research, but I would say out of the gut feel that it was probably the first marketplace ever, right? Or digital marketplace ever. And it was so successful because it really did start with an extremely customer-centric focus. And the recipe for success, in my opinion, is always going to be understanding the customers solving a problem for the customer, and then you often don't have the chicken and egg issue anymore. Yes, in theory, of course, there's always going to be both, but if you solve a problem, they kind of gel together, and it's well worth time spent if you look at if you do enough research ahead of time to really crack what it is that is going to get people truly excited. So I think, and this might be very obvious, but I still think it can't be mentioned often enough, customer centricity. Mm-hmm. Technology follows. That's not ever going to be an issue. There will always be a solution on the technology side.
Okay, yeah, many thanks, Miriam. That's very important points, and if we then think that further, for me, the question comes immediately, what about the timing? So if you identify that you need to collaborate with different partners, and if you identify this customer need that needs to be solved, and also identify your own assets that you have or that you would need to get, depending on the role you want to take in an ecosystem. Still, the question then would be for me, who wants to be first, or rather, do you want to be a follower or joining an ecosystem which is already orchestrated by someone? And maybe that's then tapping Ron again into also this offense-defense decision making, but maybe you can explain that a little bit more in detail.
I think it's a critical question, and I think in some ways it highlights the limits. So, totally agree with Miriam. Obviously, customer centricity is critical, but the question of timing highlights how insufficient a guide that on its own is. Right? Because the customer wants the best thing always. That doesn't vary over time. From a company perspective, the question is, how do you think about participation? And historically, we've always kind of, we've scolded companies who were too late and too slow to come into innovation. I think in the context of ecosystems, there's actually at least as big a risk of being too early, meaning having identified a great customer need, moving early, and then finding out that the rest of the ecosystem isn't in place. Actually, for those interested, this is like the entirety of chapter 4 of Winning the Right Game. And in order to have a perspective on timing, what it means is that you need to focus not just on the customer proposition, but also the partner proposition, right? And so kind of the cute line at the beginning of the chapter is like, if you're first to the starting line and then waiting for the flag, you've won the wrong race. Mm-hmm. And in an ecosystem, what you're waiting at the starting line for is the relevant partners to appear. And again, you can take that from the perspective of your efforts to do something totally new, right? GM was the first large car company to have an electric vehicle with the EV1. You know what they get as credit for having been first on what was a great value proposition? 0, right? And at the same time, if you're reacting too quickly to a threat that is not coming for another 10 years, you also get 0. And so this question of timing is critical. And so what I would add to Miriam's critical first point about customer centricity is, if you're thinking in terms of ecosystems, you need to develop at least as rich a toolkit for thinking about partners as you do about customers.
Actually, I'd like to add to what Ron just said. I think a lot of companies are still stuck in the old world, thinking they have to be first, and if they're not first and not the only ones, then they're not going to participate. And I think a new era is starting where it really is about the co-opetition, and where everybody kind of needs to put their egos aside and see how they can win together. And so I think the right timing is whatever adds the most value in that moment, probably.
Yeah.
Maybe also just one comment to add on these really great thoughts you just mentioned. Ecosystem game is a portfolio game. That is one of the learnings I made in the last years, and this is exactly fits to that what you were mentioning. So you have to manage your business models not just from a financial perspective with a portfolio perspective, but more also from where can you create value to which moment of time. And that means the criteria behind that is, of course, the maturity of the ecosystem market, which means if there's already a strong orchestrator, let's take e-commerce, it's not a good idea to fight against Amazon because there the market is already set. That means you have to analyze carefully the domains, meaning the topic areas where you would like to focus at, and then think about, is there already a leader, is there already an orchestrator which is too strong to compete? Then the other option is to cooperate or to look for another niche or another ecosystem domain. And that is also one part of the answer of timing. So timing is not only just from the inside out, it's also from the market, the ecosystem market perspective.
Mm. And so that's perfect, because when I've done the timing exercise, and a couple of questions are coming in a sequence then automatically. You mentioned, Miriam, this competition thing, which and the mindset of established companies then. Do you think that companies realize that at least in certain industries, they could grow the pie and benefit from participating in this growing pie instead of just being focused on the existing piece of the market?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, focusing on jointly growing the overall pie should be everybody's goal. But of course, I, in my current job at the moment, do see way too many companies trying to focus on their slice and growing their own slice. So I think they're in transition. Like I said earlier, it's one of the new buzzwords. Everyone feels like they need to understand what's going on, and I mean, it's great for consultants, right? Because they pay us to come and talk to them about it and to help them, but most of the times the mindset isn't there yet. And when it then actually comes to sitting at the table with competition to talk about what can be done or to extending your value chain up or downstream, they very often find this very difficult.
Yeah. Maybe towards the group, and maybe Ron, you want to take this question then up first. I wonder, with how many partners can you seriously start this dialogue? So if you would be willing to take the initial effort to bringing people at the desk together to share about the mindset and the idea, how many are minimum requirement, and how many would be too many? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's a critical question, right? And in some ways, if you ask me, that's one of the key tensions in thinking about acting in ecosystems, which is the end vision, the thing that's going to deliver the remarkable value that you have figured out that the customer wants, usually requires a fair number of participants to come together, not just to agree on what it is that we should do for the customer, but to agree on how we actually interact and integrate in delivering that value. And this is the problem with ecosystem as just like a buzzword that says we work together, that blinds you to the need to be really clear about what that structure of collaboration looks like. And then it's that once you have a sense for possible structures, plural, for how to deliver that value proposition, you can then step back and ask, so what is the order in which I want to bring partners on board towards this effort? Because what we know, research and practical work with companies is amply demonstrated that if you bring 10 ambitious companies into a room to talk about a vision, you'll get a lot of excited talk. But it's very hard to get them to commit. And it's interesting, commitment changes over the course of an ecosystem's development, right? In the beginning, when you're doing a pilot, everyone's in. There's no problem because everyone's excited, right? The problem in ecosystems is not how do you get partners to join you in a pilot, it's what do you do after you have a successful pilot, right? Where you need to confront issues around scale, when you need to confront issues about, well, who's really going to be leading this? Who's touching the customer? Whose brand is first? And if you haven't thought through those things from the outset, then getting to a successful pilot often turns out to be, in retrospect, kind of very painfully, a waste of time. Because if all you can get to is a successful pilot and then go nowhere, like you should have saved your resources and done something else. So this question of the number of partners is critical, and it's not. I guess what I'm trying to highlight, again, like if you care about this, that's chapter 3 of winning the right game, is how do you think about your starting point, your minimum viable ecosystems to start with, and then the structure and the order in which you build out to the full ecosystem. That is, how do you have the discipline to say, I want the big thing, but I'm going to start small?
How would you look at that from the ecosystemizer concept, Julian?
Yeah, maybe to add another perspective, which also is linked to the previous question. DNA mindset, competition and number of partners. Why is it linked? Because in traditional companies, and I have experienced that, I have worked 5 years for AXA Insurance Company, a very traditional company for the insurance sector. They are very innovative, but still an incumbent. And I was there in my last position, the head of strategy, and before the assistant of the CEO. And so I learned board meetings from the frog perspective, get to know. So and it's very interesting to see managers in incumbent companies are normally very risk averse. What it means, what they cannot control, they don't like. And this is one part of the answer for the competition thing. You cannot control that. There's a risk, a reputation risk, and so on and so forth. Of course, there are opportunities, but still, this is not in the DNA, in the education and in the personal success stories of corporate managers. Same with number of partners, Ron. So if you have, the more partners you have, the less you can control, and especially after the honeymoon phase at the beginning, if it's getting crucial, then you come back to this old habits. What can we control? What is our stake, and not this? Miriam, you said this ego thinking towards ecosystem thinking, and you come back to this old DNA. And this is, I think, it's very crucial. And we have that in each project, that the team, the business model teams, they are very passionate about developing things, open up for partnerships, and so on and so forth. But at the moment of truth, when it comes up to investments, when it comes to risk assessment, then of course you need the decision of the board, and then that is then the make or break, whether you can really pursue this also in the long-term perspective. And we have seen many examples where there were good initiatives in corporates, and we have seen today in the morning with Peter Evans, he was mentioning some of the initiatives, for instance, Bosch did, but on the other hand, there are also some of them which are not there anymore, because there's not like the long-term persistency to invest and to remain there still, even if there are problems. So all in all, maybe to break that down, I would recommend not to start with 50 partners. That's too much. You die in complexity. So 5 to 10 is maybe, just from our experience, a good starting point. Of course, it depends upon the business model, what you are doing, but that's kind of at least an experience-based number, which I can tell you from the projects we did. Yeah.
Okay, great, thanks. So that means, although ecosystem thinking and approaching a market segment and the customer experience with an ecosystem approach, there's maybe complexity underestimated very often, so you need to manage that one. Maybe the cost related to that is underestimated in the very beginning as well. I would assume there are additional traps, and from your consultancy experience, Miriam, do you see additional traps that companies run into when being very enthusiastic about we want to have an ecosystem strategy and we want to implement quick and we want to have results very soon?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually very often the moment in time where they then come to us, because the honeymoon phase is over and they feel like they have not been successful. And I think stating the obvious again, probably, it boils down to having a common purpose, to really understanding and wanting to reach a common goal. Then even if the honeymoon phase is over and everyone's slightly frustrated, if you do still believe in the purpose, then you pivot. Just like, 9 out of 10 startups fail, but from the 1 out of 10 that are successful, again, 9 out of those 10 had to pivot over the course of their business model generation. So if you believe in a common goal, then it's fully okay to, have little downfalls on the way to reaching your overall goal. So it's about being a bit more resilient, I think, and not chewing and biting off more than you can chew. So just like Julian said, don't start with 50 partners. Any software product development, product managers know, be very agile, start with a minimal viable product, and that's the same thing in this case. It's a startup in a startup in a startup potentially, building an ecosystem that you just need to iterate constantly, and if you have a common purpose and goal, then it's about reinventing yourself potentially.
Yeah. Very good, cool. Great insights. I have an additional question, which is maybe a little bit then a different perspective. Now, we have been talking a lot about sustainability throughout the morning as well in the sessions, and I wonder, do you have examples or share some thoughts how ecosystem strategies can drive sustainability in a company? One who wants to start first?
Well,
Ron?
so I can start, which is again, I go back to how do you make the notion of an ecosystem meaningful? And for me, an ecosystem is defined by it's the structure of interaction across partners to deliver a value proposition, right? And so that definition has 3 key parts. It's anchored in a value proposition, right, as opposed to a company, as opposed to an entity. There's a multiplicity of partners, and there's a structure for alignment. And I think when we look at successful versus unsuccessful efforts here, and sustainability is a perfect context to see this, where there's a shared sense about just the value proposition that doesn't then get extended to really being careful and disciplined about a strategy for the partners and the structure, we end up seeing a lot of effort, a lot of goodwill that, quite frankly, at the end is kind of squandered, right? Where we see sustainability initiatives work is where you drill down to what's the actual goal of that specific initiative, right? And whether that initiative is shifting, to a more global, to a nation-based energy footing, or whether it's within a factory, reducing some kind of waste by some percent, right? If you can't connect that to specific partners, and with partners you can't then move to a structure, it's very unlikely that things come together. So again, this ecosystem story requires, because you're rewiring the connections, it requires this extra step at the start of the project that goes beyond just finding the worthy goal. And I think, Kenny, you were asking about traps. I think part of it, with ecosystems, you have both an issue of traps, but also an issue of gaps, which is doing this kind of work requires not just a different toolkit to come up with the right answers, but it requires an internal language that allows you to communicate to people who haven't lived their career in this way. I think Julian's point about, the challenges that all the success stories within the company are, they're built with one language from one set of histories. If you want to introduce something new, part of what you have to do as the champion is, figure out how to make this thing understandable to the rest of the organization, and particularly the key stakeholders who need to approve making these bigger and longer term bets.
Yeah, great.
Maybe to add on that, so once again, I talked about ecosystem domains as the scoping perspective for topics, and we said sustainability is kind of a super topic because it's across life areas, it's across industries, and so that means that's a really big topic where there's still a lot to do. I mean, that's a no-brainer on the one hand. On the other hand, companies so far can only leverage the power for their own assets with the topic of sustainability together with others. Because if they don't like just to improve their own footprint, for instance, if they just want to improve their green behavior, they have to collaborate if they want to do it in business models. And that's also part of the answer. I think so far sustainability is very much, at least in the top management, seen as we have to do it and we do our homework, but it's an internal perspective. And to bring that more into the business model and to make really money and not to see it just as a cost center, that is one part of the answer. And to give one example, very concrete example from our work, I mean, in Germany, we have the situation that our government forces us as citizens, and I mean that in a positive way because I think that's a good way. We can talk about the details, but forces us to actually change our heating systems at home to make them CO2 neutral. And the keyword is heating pumps. You have seen that in the media with the Fissmann carrier deal, which is there then also on an international level, not on a German one. And so we have many projects where this whole issue of ecological transformation and energy is in focus. And interesting is that from different angles, you have, of course, energy companies in this game. You have energy traders which want to actually create business for the future, which also want to sell and fulfill services around the ecological transformation. But you also have banks who have to finance that, who think, can I be part of this actually growing ecosystem of green energy for households, but also for businesses? And with whom do I have to partner? And so this is one very interesting field where you have from different sides coming companies together to create value for us as human beings, but also for businesses. And so this is something where there's potential. It's a growing market. And now there has to be decided who takes the role of the orchestrator, who takes the role of the realizer, and so on and so forth. And this is one very concrete topic, I think, and we will see much more, definitely.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you, Julian. And getting briefly back to that question, whether now in company headquarters sustainability is seen as a we must do that or we need to do that. Miriam, would you confirm that from your consultancy experience? Is it more like no, we need to do it? It's an obligation, or do companies understand it's necessary to deliver to the customer expectation?
You get all forms and shapes and colors,
Okay.
to be honest. Of course, the regulation very often forces companies by a certain point in time to deliver results. Some companies really truly have incorporated this into their purpose and into their strategy. And then, of course, there's others that try to get away with doing the minimum. It really depends on leadership and individuals on the top level, and of course also the willingness of employees to support. So, for example, consulting companies, they travel. The employees travel a lot. They a lot less than prior to COVID. We do not go to the client site for a whole week, every single week anymore, because clients have also realized it's very easy to do the remote work. But nevertheless, we do still travel quite a bit, and there, of course, it's about trying to avoid taking an airplane, taking the train, or that's probably it. Then actually taking the train is encouraged, but of course you can't force anybody. So it's really about each individual company and their philosophy.
Okay, good. Yeah, thank you. And I think it's time to move over to the questions of the audience with that. We have mics available. Are there questions here in the room? I think that's Chris.
Thank you for this amazing panel on ecosystem design. I have a question of disruptive potential. So what do you think about disruptive elements that force a new way, to deal with new customer needs? And I wanted to ask you, do you have any specific experiences with situations where a market situation changes rapidly, and if that is a good way to create a new ecosystem on?
Someone who wants to take the question?
Well, I'm happy to take a shot. Which is, so I think it's interesting. If you, again, ecosystem is kind of this big buzzword. Disruption's a different buzzword. You put them together, you get an explosion of bees and buzziness. But I think there is, there's something fundamentally different about ecosystem disruption and kind of the traditional sense of disruption, right? So the early version of what disruption was, if you think about Clay Christensen and the Innovator's Dilemma, it was all about new entrants coming in and could be a different business model, it could be a new technology, but they were finding a way of doing your job in a different way, right? So, the classic examples were, disk drives that were smaller and cheaper but good enough, or, discount airlines that would disrupt the full service airlines. In all those cases, and even if you step back broadly in the way we think about strategy, jet engines replacing propellers, radical innovations, et cetera, it's all about disruption on the technology side. But at the end of the day, you look at the industry and the industry is still really recognizable, right? EasyJet is, competing with Lufthansa. It's still an airline industry. Whereas when we see these, if Amazon comes in and tries to compete online to create this new category, and Walmart or Carrefour, they're trying to respond in the context of retail. And ecosystem disruptions come in when somebody is redrawing the boundaries and redrawing wires, right? So Julian's example before is you don't want to compete with Amazon. Well, you don't want to compete with them head to head, but this company Shopify, has created huge value by empowering smaller retailers in a different way. Right, and that's a different kind of disruption, right? It's a disruption in the relationships and the structure through which the value is delivered versus just what's happening inside the specific box. And so I think, to the question is, does the notion of ecosystems open up a new opportunity for disruption? I think the answer is, very, very strong yes. And kind of the corollary to that is not understanding the way in which ecosystem disruption differs from classic disruption leaves you with a massive blind spot, both on the offense and the defense side. So
very good. Thank you,
very
Ron.
strong yes to the question.
Thank you, Ron.
Just one example, I think, which of course is also very much German because we have a strong automotive industry, and I think mobility or automotive is a good example, because if you just analyze the strategies of the incumbents like Mercedes, BMW and others, if you compare to Tesla, which actually enter the market already with an ecosystem mindset in terms of combining energy, mobility and now gaming together with partners, and if you have the new kids on the block, NIO, who actually doesn't start at all to create the best cars, but to create the best experience and to create communities, to tackle different life areas with a holistic customer experience by entering in also in work, in living, and trying to get creating more and more touch points beyond the car. Then this is, for me, a good example. I mean, we don't know it yet how it will end up, but it's a different approach how to enter markets. And I think that really fits well also, Ron, to your point, that that is, it's not an, what is NEO? Is it a car producer or is it an experience company? Or what does it want to be in the future? And I think this is the very interesting point, and there we come back to that experience issue at the beginning. What is actually the output of ecosystems? Superior experiences. And I think the more you can, and the better you can create them, the more disruption potential you can actually leverage. And this is my view on that. Yeah,
that's a great summary. Looking at the time,
Yeah,
allowing for...
I think we have one more.
One more?
Looking at the time. I have an online question from Daniel Buhatier. How do you shift mindset of leaders to get buy-in? And what are some top practical tips to get them thinking less traditionally and more in an ecosystem manner? Tough one, huh?
I'll take that one. I think I'll take that one, yes.
Yeah.
So again, customer centricity, because it's about knowing what type of person this leader is. Everyone is motivated for different reasons. You really need to understand who you're talking to and what rocks their boat. And some of their boats will be rocked by showing them the value add and the money they will make with it. Others will be driven by purpose. I think it's about changing mindset, not because you believe in something, but understanding what will make the person you're trying to convince believe in it as well. Make sure you research these people and have a coffee and see what their needs are, see what their fears are. And that's, again, a very customer-centric approach. When you want to sell something to somebody, make sure you understand what they need.
Yeah, very good.
And only one remark, I think you have to make sure for the C-level that the risk of doing nothing is higher than the risk of investing in new business models with an ecosystem perspective. Sounds very theoretical, but you have to break that down, you have to show that, to prove that, and that is obviously very ambitious, but this is actually the thing. You have to mitigate that they just say, okay, that's not of interest. The old DNA of being very risk averse is making you successful. And I really experienced it. I had many board members who were telling me I'm not a good manager because I'm an entrepreneur, but I was a good controller, I was a good project manager, I was a good consultant before, so I know the toolkit of making a career. And now, if I want to remain on the top, I don't risk too much. So to show that doing nothing is a risk, this is actually the answer. Once again, that's for sure not very easy, but that's part of the answer.
Yeah, very good. And maybe a last takeaway on what would be your...
Yeah, I think... No,
go... Please
I
add.
think the one thing I would add to that is, sometimes it's a matter of inertia and conservatism within an organization. And certainly outcomes can look inert. But it's interesting, there are very few large companies today where leadership isn't saying they want to take risks. And there are very few large companies today that aren't allocating a ridiculous amount of resource to new initiatives, right? And I think it's important to distinguish between companies that are not making bets versus companies that aren't showing success from their bets. And so here again, I think it's, clearly you have to worry about culture, you have to worry about inertia. But for me, I think there's a really important part, which is, again, maybe 30 years ago, companies were a little bit sleepy. No one's asleep today. And so I think there really is a need for a serious revisiting of strategy and our basic approaches to it. I think there's a new set of concepts, right? Look, the last 20 years of my academic career, we're trying to articulate these in these books. Mine aren't the only books that do this, but I think that beyond thinking about the motivation of the organization, we have to think about the process and really importantly, the language and the metrics that are used internally that support certain kinds of efforts, but turn out not to support these kind of collaborative ecosystem efforts. And I think, my own experience is that when you present that within the C-suite, things begin to click, right? The accusation of, oh, you're not risk takers tend to not convince the people, who are being accused of not taking risks. They always feel like they're taking a lot of risk. The question is, how do you change the way they articulate, quantify, and like just internally qualitatively characterize what it is that's trying to be done. So I would say, yes, there's kind of the motivation, but also like, let's not underestimate the need for like literally new language and new tools for doing the job.
Yeah. And maybe then to wrap it up as well, I think, Milja, we need to watch the time. That were already great takeaways also for the participants and the audience. And as a practitioner who's then in an incumbent company, in a market, aiming to build ecosystems around platforms and being busy with that, also addressing to the question how to convince your C-level to get engaged. If you find that purpose, the problem to solve in the community, if you find that you need additional partners to solve that issue in a more efficient way, explaining and convincing works if you then address the core business and the risk which it might mean to the core business in not doing something and in not strengthening the own core business position by opening the mindset, by looking around with whom can I partner, use digitalization to make that even more attractive and faster and more efficient. And with that, and then I'm addressing the point of Chris again, with that try to disrupt how the value chain of an industry really works. So I hope you found that a very interesting round. I'm very excited that we had that extensive exchange and lots of contribution in here. So many thanks, Ron, first of all to you taking the time and the effort to join in from Zoom. Promise you are missing a nice party tonight. That's sad for you. Maybe you get some pics from that. And many thanks also to Miriam van Straelen and to Julian Kawohl for being here on stage with us. And for those here in the hall, if you want to continue talking about ecosystems, feel free to approach us. For those remotely, send us a message, LinkedIn or whatever, so we get in touch. Many thanks.